Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comes rushing to the defense of genocide Joe Biden after mass calls from the Democratic Party and corporate media to get that feeble old man out of here.
The matter is closed. He had reiterated that this morning. He has reiterated that to the public. Joe Biden is our nominee. He is not leaving this race. He is in this race, and I support him.
Oh, AOC, Mama Bear will be so proud. We need progressives to understand that AOC is just the average normie shit-lib Democrat. But what AOC does is actually very nefarious, and she plays a very important role for the establishment. AOC is here to shift what it means to be a socialist to the right. AOC wants people to associate the left with people who vote and support neo-Nazis in Ukraine. AOC wants people to associate the left with the people who voted to break the rail strike. What kind of socialist votes to break a strike? AOC also wants us to normalize genocide. AOC herself calls what Israel is doing a genocide. Then she endorses the person who is arming and facilitating said genocide. That makes you among the most morally bankrupt people in the world. At least the Hillary Clinton style Zionist Democrat who denies the genocide is voting for someone they believe is doing right, but you acknowledge Biden is doing a genocide, but still vote for him? These intellectual and moral inconsistencies is exactly why AOC is one of the least popular politicians in this country, with her numbers as bad as Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi. This illustrates what AOC's most crucial job for the establishment is. AOC's job is to make socialism and what it means to be on the left as unpopular as possible.
Haaretz, a publication in Israel, admits that the IDF ordered the Hannibal directive on October 7th after initially smearing journalists who made this claim months ago. There was crazy hysteria. Decisions were made without verified information. Yup, the documents and testimonies obtained by Haaretz prove that the Hannibal order wasn't implied or insinuated, but they actually used the word Hannibal. One example was at 7:18 a.m. at the Yifta Post. After they realized one of the IDF soldiers had been captured, the order was given, Hannibal at arrest, and it came from the divisional headquarters. They dispatched the Zeke, which is a drone, and they handled their business. At 7:41 a.m., the order was given again. That wasn't the last time it was given. In fact, there were multiple times after this that the Hannibal directive was explicitly given to kill Israeli soldiers so that they would not fall into captivity by Hamas. Do y'all know how many of us were attacked, smeared, berated as anti-Semitic because we reported that the Hannibal directive had been used? And most of us used reporting directly from Israeli documents before to prove that information. Here, Max Blumenthal points out that Haaretz pegged him as a manipulator for reporting on the Israeli army's killing of many Israeli citizens on October 7th. Max also points out that the Washington Post published 2 lie-filled smears about members of the Gray Zone for helping to expose the Hannibal directive scandal. Roger Waters tried to explain this to Piers Morgan, explaining that Israel was responsible for some of the death toll that day on October 7th, and Piers just shrugged him off. Like, no, that's not true. Bro, Sam Husseini tried to ask State Department spokesperson Miller about the Hannibal directive just last month. And the State Department allegedly never heard of this Hannibal directive. And I just love how you have all of these propagandists playing stupid or naive as they attack actual journalists for doing their job. Because it was literally in a Haaretz article that the Hannibal directive is a thing. It was just canceled allegedly in 2016 by Israel's chief of staff. Yet another lie by Israel. Surprise, surprise. But as usual, it gets deeper. Now, we all know by now that Israel had advanced knowledge of October 7th before it happened and basically did nothing about it. But what was even crazier is the fact that we found out, thanks to reporting by people like Ben Swan, that they knew that the party goers were being shot at the festival at 7 a.m. and told them to fend for themselves. The shooting started at 7 a.m. The IDF didn't show up until 3 p.m. And the military officer responsible for telling them to fend for themselves just so happened to be responsible for the fact that the festival was moved from another area to the border of Gaza that day. So he moved them into the danger and then told them to fend for themselves. So just in case we're keeping score here, journalists were attacked for saying that Israel was at least partially responsible for the lives lost that day. And it turned out we were right. They weren't just indirectly responsible. They literally gave an order to kill Israelis that day. And in at least one instance, a group was moved from a safe location to a dangerous location and then told to fend for themselves as they were being mowed down. So just like the violence we've seen from Israel since October 7th has been so destructive that it seems to have nothing to do with protecting the hostages or targeting Hamas, it seems like even the day of October 7th, all the damage that Israel wreaked that day had nothing to do with protecting or saving Israeli hostages and had nothing to do with specifically targeting Hamas. It's almost as if they were looking for a reason to go into Gaza, and October 7th gave them that reason. Now, if you want to call me a conspiracy theory for that, go right ahead.
What's poppin', my friends, my family? We are back. Welcome, Nick in the morning. You guys know we had another banger episode yesterday, Nick at noon, Nick in the morning, Nick at night, Nick at any time. What's poppin'? That was amazing work from my hotspot brother, my fellow hotspot assassin, Nico House, exposing the Hannibal directive, something that we've been explaining to people about on this show. I know this is a unusual time, but we have a amazing guest. I definitely wanted to make time for her. I literally, before I got live, I finished a hotspot like 5 minutes ago. Now, my boy, my hotspot brother, Nico House, put out this absolute banger yesterday. So I wanted to definitely share that with you guys. Also wanted to bring my amazing guest, Eva Bartlett, on. I have another banger for you guys. I just finished, like maybe 5 minutes ago. I'm rushing. That's why my thumbnail is Aaron will be replacing the thumbnail with a formal thumbnail. I didn't even have time to make a formal thumbnail for the show. But there's a lot to talk about. And this is Nico explaining the Hannibal directive. And once the truth about the genocide gets out, it's going to rock humanity to their core. It's going to rock humanity to its core when they realize they was lied about everything regarding October 7th. For example, now people are realizing the Hannibal directive was activated. People are realizing the IDF was killing their own civilians. People are realizing, this according to a UN report as well, that there is no evidence of mass rape by Hamas. And I explained this using critical thinking. And with it, after this, I want to introduce my guest. Do you guys know that you had around 300 or so Hamas fighters who died on October 7th? The media never talked about this. You have IDF soldiers shooting at you. You had Israeli citizens who are armed shooting at you. You have Apache helicopters raining down hellfire at you. You're watching your brothers, your comrade at arms, die in brutal and horrific ways during this moment that you've been training for. You're in for years. This is the moment you've been waiting for. You signed up for Hamas because you wanted to free your people, and you have this operation that is extremely high pressure. And it's so high pressure that there are checkpoints, there are time checkpoints that you must hit in order to make this extremely high pressure military operation successful. But what Zionists will have you believe, during this high pressure military operation, which was successful, while hundreds of their comrades in arms is dying, as they are facing hellfire from Apache helicopters, as they are fighting off Israeli settlers who are armed, they would have you believe during this high-pressure situation that members of Hamas got aroused. They got erections and they started mass raping people in the middle of this highly successful and highly stressful military operation. That's what they want you to believe. These lies are starting to become dismantled. The work that I do at Hotspot, what we're trying to do at RBN, is part of that. And with that said, I want to bring another critically acclaimed journalist on, also get her thoughts. We have international journalists, I would say critically acclaimed international journalists who debunk the lies of the United States empire and actually tell the truth about the countries that our empire lies about by actually traveling to said countries. So it's great to have you on RBN. Welcome, Eva Bartlett.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great intro too.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I was just on your show and we had a fantastic conversation
Yeah.
because you traveled to many of the places that I discussed and a lot of places I want to go. We're going to talk about North Korea here very soon. But I've been covering the situation in the apartheid genocidal state of Israel ever since my time as a citizen journalist. I got a long way to go before I hit the levels Eva Bartlett is at. But I've been doing it for maybe about 3 years now. I want to travel. I want to learn more. I get a lot of my information from talking to people who've been to a lot of these places. I talked to Palestinians. I had countless indigenous activists on Palestinian roundtables. So that's how, as someone who is not really well traveled, I get my information. So I'm so glad to have you on because you actually been to the West Bank, and as someone who traveled there, you have a very unique insight. So I want to start there very broadly. I want you to discuss your time in the West Bank, the misconceptions that many Americans may have about Palestinians, the West Bank, and this conflict. So I'll pass it to you very broadly. Thank you for joining us once again, Eva.
Oh, thank you so much, Nick. Well, I mean, I have to say, similar to you, my political journey began with Palestine. And I'm always upfront saying that I came from a very apolitical background. So when I literally stumbled across the issue of Palestine around 2003 or 4, it impacted me because I had had the Western schooling upbringing. I wasn't anti-Palestinian. I was just apathetic. And I always say that because I think it's important to people who feel like this, these issues are too great for us to grasp. No, we can grasp them. It's just we have to realize that we've been programmed, or we simply haven't been presented with any information. Therefore, whatever we see in Hollywood or advertising or talk shows or whatever has an effect on us. But if you actually, this is what my Twitter and other profiles are like. I go to places I write about because I have, through my experience, first as an activist and then as a journalist, that has been my motivating factor, is to see for myself. I never pretend, and I want to make this caveat about Palestine, about North Korea or Syria. Syria and Palestine have a huge amount of experience in, but I don't pretend to have all the answers. And I just want to make that clear. What I do is share the experience I've had on the ground. So in 2007, I went to the West Bank via Jordan. And I went to join the activist group, the International Solidarity Movement. I had done quite a bit of reading about Palestine, but I wouldn't ever claim myself a scholar. I just wanted to go and see for myself. I had a good idea, as you do from talking with people and reading various articles and publications. I had a good idea of what I might see, but of course it's always different on the ground. You can read about one thing, but when you actually see it and experience it, it's life-changing. And I think that most people that have gone to occupied Palestine have, it's difficult to return to a so-called normal life. It really impacts you because the horrors that Palestinians endure on a daily basis, combined with, or in conjunction with the hospitality and love and friendship and kindness you're met from Palestinians who are living under some of the worst oppression in the world and have been for decades, it really, I think, affects most people. And if it doesn't, then I don't know. I guess that says something about your mentality. But so in 2007, I spent 8 months in the West Bank, and I did go on my own dime. But after a couple of weeks, I joined the ISM, the International Solidarity Movement. And the premise there was that they bear witness to the crimes of the Israeli apartheid regime against Palestinians. So whether it's at these hundreds of checkpoints that oppress Palestinians and prevent them from moving from point A to point B. So for example, I used to live in Ontario. If I wanted to go from Kitchener to Toronto, for a Palestinian, that would be an unimaginable journey of trying to get through probably tens of checkpoints for that distance. If it's a shorter distance, it could be one checkpoint, but that checkpoint might mean that you just simply don't get to the second point you're going to, which you might need for education, work, medical care, whatever. Or if you do get there, it's with a huge delay of an hour, several hours. on top of which the Israeli soldiers can at any point take the Palestinian Hawiyah, their identification, and just keep it. And if Palestinians travel without it in the West Bank, in what is supposed to be their land, if they're stopped at an Israeli military checkpoint without that Hawiyah, then they could just be snatched off the street and sent to Israeli prisons. And we know right now there's nearly 10,000 Palestinian political prisoners in prisons, Palestinian hostages in Israeli prisons. So these checkpoints, and they can be the permanent checkpoints, which are these really dehumanizing turnstile checkpoints, or they can be two jeeps pulled together to cross a block off a road. They can be a dirt mound, or they can be big cement blocks blocking off a road. And these are just one aspect of what makes life miserable for Palestinians, and even deadly. For example, if you have a medical emergency and you're trying to get from your village to Nablus or somewhere else, and you can't get through that 5-minute stretch of road, you have to take the roundabout route and go through various checkpoints, then there are many occasions when the person needing medical care doesn't get it because the Israelis don't allow them through. That's one aspect. I spent a lot of time, like months, in this area south of Hebron, or Khalil in Arabic, and it's like a desert-like area that they weren't nomadic people, but they were shepherds. They had flocks of sheep and goats, and they lived off the land. I spent a lot of time in this particular area called Susia, and the Palestinians had been living in homes. Some of them were above ground. Some of them were actually very ingenious cave dwellings. And in the 90s, the Israelis evicted them. And one tactic they use is to say, this is now a closed military zone. And then they don't have to present any evidence, as is always the case. And they evict the people from their land. And so when I spent time with them, they were living in ramshackle tents made of plastic and whatever bits and bobs they could string together to create a dwelling. And they were constantly aggressed by the illegal Jewish colonists that lived nearby, and by the Israeli army, and sometimes both, or not sometimes, frequently both together. So they've been evicted from their homes. They're living in ridiculously awful dwellings, and then they're being aggressed all the time by the colonists and the soldiers, and they have their flocks of sheep or goats stolen, and they have their wells of water poisoned, and they have their olive trees razed or stolen. That's another aspect. I think it was September, October, during the olive harvest, Palestinians have to request a permit from the Israeli authorities to access their own farmland. And even they're not even always granted that, of course, but even I saw on many occasions when we accompanied farmers to their farmland, when they would go on their land, they would be assaulted by the Israeli military or these illegal Jewish colonists. And in fact, one time I was with farmers and it was a beautiful harvest, actually. It was like, if they weren't being assaulted, it's actually a very beautiful cultural procedure where they're picnicking. The families are working together to gather the olives that would then be pressed and made into olive oil, which is absolutely gorgeous, by the way. And then we were assaulted by I think it was 6 young teenager colonists that were on a hill above us, slinging these massive rocks. Okay, sticks and stones, right? We know that saying. But when they're large rocks being slung at you from a hilltop, I mean, if I hadn't been filming, one would have hit my temple. As it was, one massive rock hit the head of a Palestinian farmer, thankfully not killing him. But these are the kinds of things they endure, or they're not given the permit to get on their land, or they're given the permit to be on their land, and then the colonists come down from their hilltop with their weapons, their rifles or whatever they are, and the Israeli soldiers accompanying them, and the Palestinians have to get off their land. These are aspects, I'm sure you know about this from your Palestinian contacts, but this is what I was seeing. I spent a lot of time in Nablus during and after Israeli military incursions or invasions into that city, and would go to the houses of Palestinian civilians who had Israeli soldiers occupying their homes, who had been herded into one home and denied access to the basics of life, food, toilet, medicines, and they'd had their houses destroyed. That kind of thing. I spent a lot of time in villages surrounding Nablus where they had these permanent, the Israelis called them curfews, but they're invasions, and they're basically lockdowns, wherein the Israeli military will barge in day or night, particularly terrifying at night, And they will barge in with sirens blaring and just screaming at the Palestinians, stay in your homes. And even if they stay in their homes, that's not a guarantee of safety. The Israelis will just barge into the homes, shoot up the homes, abduct people, including children, and otherwise just continue coming back and terrorizing them. And they were doing this in one village, Azun, which I spent several weeks in. The Israeli military was doing this all the time, meaning kids couldn't go to school, businesses were shut down. So it's psychological terror, but it's also shutting down the economy, shutting down their ability to function. It's like Gaza in a microcosm. And then I spend a lot of time in places like Bilain, which is a West Bank village that is resisting the Israeli theft of their land via the Israeli apartheid wall. And since, I believe it was 2005, they have very creatively and nonviolently resisted. They'd held protest every Friday. Virtually the whole village comes out, including children and elderly, and they're met with a barrage of high velocity tear gas canisters, live ammunition, rubber coated metal bullets. And I think it was around 10 times that I went on demonstrations to bear witness and to document, I was usually with the people marching at the front. So I saw what was happening. And every single time that I was there, the Israelis released their hellfire on the Palestinian civilians before any Palestinian shabab or youth would sling a rock in defiance of the heavily armed Israeli military. So, like we always hear people condemning stupidly Palestinian resistance. And as we discussed when you were on my show, Palestinians under international law have the right, and anybody in their right mind would resist what Palestinians are subjected to. But under international law, they have the right to resist the Israeli occupation. But then people are always saying, well, they should just resist nonviolently. Well, they have been in Bilain and other West Bank villages for years and years and years. And in Gaza, I don't know if we discussed it. I think I meant to when we were talking about the Great March of Return a couple of years ago. And the Israeli military were just sniping Palestinians, just picking them off and murdering them. And I saw it in my time in Gaza. I would often go with protests, and it was the same scenario. No tear gas, no rubber bullets, just live ammunition shot directly at the bodies of the unarmed protesters. So the 8 months I spent in the West Bank were very much life-changing for me. I would like to go back. I was ultimately deported. I was arrested once and held for 2 days in handcuffs and shackles. And I underplayed it when I talked to somebody called a Toronto Star, I think, journalist. And I was pretty naive and not very media savvy. And I was very much aware of what Palestinians, and we're going to talk about prisoners in a moment, but what they're subjected to. So I was like, no, I'm fine. But, in reality, I had shackles on my ankles that bit into my tendons and handcuffs all the time. I was handcuffed to another female that was arrested with me. And we were arrested because we were with Palestinians who had successfully removed one of these or several of these big cement roadblocks that cut their road from their village to Nablus, again, 5-minute drive. And the Israeli military came back, and so we sat on the roadblocks, and then we were plucked off and arrested. Whatever, it wasn't a very successful protest, but you're going with what you feel at the time. But anyway, I mean, imagine if that happened in Russia or in Syria. Oh my God, this person's arrested for protesting an illegal roadblock, and then they're handcuffed and shackled and basically fed soft porn in the room that I was kept in the first night and sensory deprivation. Now I understand all that stuff, but I'm very much aware of the situation for Palestinian political prisoners, which is just horrific. I mean, you see the stuff coming out now. It's always been terrible for them, but now in the past 9 months, Israel has intensified its torture and rape of Palestinian political prisoners, men and women, elderly and not. And you see these shocking images and videos of prisoners, both from Gaza and the West Bank, being released, and you can see the horrors in their eyes. They've been tortured to such a degree. You can see they're like shell shocked. Sometimes they can't walk, or often they can't walk, and they bear the signs of torture on their bodies. And you must contrast that to the videos of the Israelis that were released by Hamas. And I know what people will say, like, oh, well, this was just for show. They kept them, healthy and like relatively looking the same after 8-9 months as they had been when they were detained or taken captive. But even if you want to believe this is for show, the fact is they haven't been abused. They haven't been starved in a place like Gaza, where the population is dying of deliberate starvation policies of Israel. And yet the Israeli captives are relatively unscathed and relatively healthy. You know, the most they complain about certain things they would have liked to have had, but they're not complaining about torture. Not like this man you're showing. I believe he was from Hebron, if I remember. And the scene of him, I forget his name, Muatiz, I think maybe, of him walking after he was released, and he's being helped to walk by other people because he can't walk on his own because his limbs, as if I recall, his limbs were broken or subjected to such torture. He can't walk, and he's clearly just in extreme psychological state of torture. So anyway, that's a bit of a segue from what I was saying about the West Bank, but I do think it is important to highlight these issues about the West Bank because whereas Gaza is rightfully so in the spotlight, life has been hell for Palestinians throughout occupied Palestine, including in areas, so-called Israel, where there are dozens of laws discriminating against non-Jewish Israeli citizens, of which there are obviously Palestinians. But in the West Bank, you know, I think that average people have no idea what it's like. I mean, even just the simple thing that you can't go from point A to B without being stopped by a belligerent Israeli soldier who will dehumanize you and, you know, do everything possible to make you feel like you're not human. And they endure this on a daily basis, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's why I greatly enjoyed our conversation, especially when we were talking about the resistance, because I am from the Midwest in the United States. I grew up under very conservative values, even though I wouldn't necessarily describe that as my current value, but I still got a few of that. And I believe there are certain things that you should do as a man. Even I believe some people may say it's a form of toxic masculinity, but I believe as a man, your job is to protect and defend your family. Now you have these fraudulent right-wingers, these cowardly beta males who have a flag fetish, who actually don't believe in the principles and the concept in which they claim. The message that they spread is give me liberty or give me death. That is what white Americans tell them. So they will say, we believe in give me liberty or give me death. And then they see a resistance movement that is challenging a government that is not only acting illegally, but is trampling upon their rights. Remember, don't trample on me? Remember the Second Amendment they love to talk about? But then they see resistance fighters resist the government, then they want to call them terrorists. They want to immediately take the side of the government. They don't really believe in what they say. Now, I believe, and I truly believe this, and that's why I would never in a million years condemn Hamas. It's the reason why I don't even consider people to be good on this issue if they condemn Palestinian resistance, because if I believe, and for example, there's so many horrific things that you laid out there, and I want to get your thoughts on people on the Palestinian resistance and people's reaction to it. But I shared this anecdote many times on the channel. But for example, I have family that live all around there. I have an elderly aunt and I have an elderly mom who live just around the block. I am just imagining a hostile foreign government that forcibly evicts my elderly mom, like the videos I see of elderly Palestinian women being forcibly evicted. If that happened to my mother, if my niece was murdered because an IDF sniper was bored and decided to put a bullet between their eyes, sign me up to a mosque within a millisecond of that happening. Any person.
But what if you know God gave them the land and God said this is your land? Like, then I'm sorry, your argument is just how can anybody rationalize Israel's argument, especially when the original Zionists didn't even necessarily consider Palestine as their land?
It's the insanity that they tell themselves, and the Zionist project, the Zionist ideology is being exposed as the fraudulent mess that it is. Because if you did what Israel did to the Palestinians on my family, like Hamas would be too moderate for me. like Hamas would be too. In October 7th, and we talked about the Hannibal directive during the intro. The reason why people are upset about October 7th because it was a successful military operation. And a lot of people who claim that they stand with Palestinians, they don't actually stand with Palestinians, they stand with their corpse. They know they can get likes and retweets that they show sympathy towards a dead Palestinian. But whenever there's a victory for the resistance, God forbid. But I know you want to chime in, so feel free to share your thoughts.
Well, I mean, I'm going to be repeating myself what I said when we had our conversation a few weeks ago, I guess it was. These same types of people would, on the other hand, champion the terrorists in Syria that were dubbed and continue to be dubbed by Western media and Western politicians as so-called rebels, and that were armed and violent from inception. That's not to say there weren't people within Syria that legitimately were having, wanted political changes. And I have friends in Syria that said, in the beginning, they attended some of the protests, but they very quickly realized this was not protests for political change. These were protests they might have not known at the time, but these were protests cultivated and backed by the West, which armed in tandem with Gulf states these terrorists, and they committed from the very beginning heinous acts against Syrian civilians. Not put Syrian military aside, against Syrian civilians. They committed all sorts of massacres in the early months, of 2011, and yet they were championed by the West. They were championed by Western media as rebels. And then you have, as we've already said, this very clear-cut case where under international law, Palestinians can and should resist their occupation. And like you say, they're dubbed any number of nefarious terms, terrorist, whatever, extremist. And they're doing your analogy of protecting your niece or your mother or your sister, whomever, your neighborhood is the perfect analogy, because that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I quote, and we are seeing a rebellion from the Western oligarchs regarding international law. They are trying to say that international law doesn't exist when they are fighting their enemy. Like, so for example, they can bomb all the hospitals they want.
Right.
They're currently lying about Russia bombing the hospitals. I've seen a lot of great reporting from people we have on our own show, like Clay Bowles, a lot of people from Shay Bowles, I apologize, and a lot of reports on the Gray Zone and many other people debunking that. But even if that were true, you guys understand that the IDF completely dismantled the entire medical infrastructure of Gaza. They kidnapped the director of Al-Shifa Hospital and tortured him for 8 months. They tortured him for 8 months. So everything they accuse Hamas and resistance fighters of doing is, I would say, a projection, but they're not even doing it justice. It's way worse than they actually do. The worst caricature of Hamas. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So just on this, so you're making reference to Ukraine's Kiev's claims that Russia bombed a children's hospital not long ago. Right. And the Western media, of course, picked up on that and it amplified it, and we're aghast. And we can get into how it's not even logical. Russia didn't do it.
I would actually love to hear your thoughts on that. I wasn't sure if you followed it or not. But I would
I mean, I can't maybe say the specifics, but as I understand, it was Ukrainian air defense missiles, which would have hit the hospital. And as I understand it, and I apologize if I'm getting it wrong or misremembering, but there was a military site near the hospital that was targeted by Russia. But please, if I'm wrong about that, excuse me. The point I wanted to make, in Donetsk in June 2022, I spent a lot of 2022 going to the Donbass. And June was, I was going to say June was a particularly hard hit month, but many of the months were. September was as well. But in June, Ukrainian forces targeted a maternity hospital in Donetsk, in the center of the city. No military objects near the hospital. I went to the site. Thankfully, the women, the patients and medical staff had been sheltering in the basement because Ukraine had been shelling the city throughout the day. But this was, and I wrote an article about that afterwards, saying here's a clear case of this Western hypocrisy. Like, oh no, don't you dare bomb hospitals unless it's our guys, then it's fine. Yeah. In Syria, in Daraa, which is a southern city in Syria, I went to Daraa before it was fully liberated, and I went to the state hospital. I'm trying to remember if this is 2017 or 18. I I'll have to get back to you on that. In any case, the city hadn't been liberated yet. To reach the state hospital, the terrorist factions were still shelling the government-controlled areas of Dara. And I went in a taxi, and to reach the hospital, there was a stretch of road, maybe, I don't know, 50 or 100 meters, where we had to gun it in a taxi. This wasn't an armored car. This is a taxi, to get to the hospital. And there were, I believe it was Al-Qaeda snipers 100 meters off to the right. I think that would have been the west. And, you know, I had the privilege of being in a taxi. You know, if you're a Syrian civilian in Dara trying to get to that hospital, walking along that stretch of sniper road, like, you're not going to make it. Most likely you're going to end up wounded or something. Then in the hospital itself, entire wards were out of use because they had been subjected to a terrorist sniping and shelling. So, you know, I wrote about this saying, like, you know, obviously, where was the Western outrage and condemnation? Where was the Western outrage and condemnation when in 2012 or 2013, terrorists, I believe that was, they truck bombed the, what was the name of that hospital in Aleppo? It was a massive cancer treatment hospital in Aleppo. Al-Kindi Hospital. They destroyed it. They completely gutted it and destroyed it by bombing. You know, and of course there was no outrage. So here we have claims against Russia bombing that are not verified. And if I find, while we're talking, if I find a link, because I know I was reading something today, how even Ukrainian sources are saying it was air defense, their air defense.
Yeah.
But you have so many, and I think what you're saying about Al-Shifa and all hospitals throughout Gaza being deliberately targeted, the Israelis invading, gutting the hospitals, destroying the equipment, killing patients inside, killing and or kidnapping doctors, leaving graveyards of people inside the hospital complexes, you know, destroying their ability, on top of which, of course, the siege that Israel has imposed on Gaza since 2006 or 7, meaning that for when I was there in 2008, from 2008 to 2013, there was a dearth of essential medical supplies the entirety of the time that I was there. You know, and this is, it got worse and worse and worse as the years went on. And then you add to this, to the current time, the genocide Israel is committing against Palestinians in Gaza. And they've already had a medical system that has been decimated by nearly 2 decades of siege. Not only medical supplies not coming in, but the equipment they have not being able to be upgraded or serviced because it was equipment from abroad, specialist doctors not being able to get into Gaza. Like this horrible layer of, if you only look at the medical sector, of impossible situation for treating Palestinians that needed treatment outside of Gaza and had a doctor's referral notes. The Israelis and the Egyptians who are complicit would prevent them, for the most part, from leaving Gaza. There were some cases where they'd be allowed to leave. I mean, that's all leading up to before October 7th, 2023. And then, like you aptly pointed out, then Israel just went and occupied Al-Shifa, destroyed it, and kidnapped the director and kidnapped numerous staff, and then continued to do that throughout Gaza. You know, and it's just like the media have the audacity to, if they even mention a hospital in Gaza being destroyed, they won't say who did it. I mean, gee, who could it have been?
I'll pass right back to you, but it's extremely morally bankrupt because not only are they hypocritical, they were openly defending the idea of targeting the hospital because Joe Biden said he saw evidence with his own eyes that Al-Shifa was Hamas headquarters. Then it came out, even the Washington Post in the Times of London, my friends, not friends of the Palestinians, they did individual investigations and found that there is no evidence that Al-Shifa Hospital was Hamas headquarters. There was these video packages that the IDF were putting together to try to prove that Al-Shifa was Hamas headquarters, and it was so cartoonishly bad, they became memes on TikTok that Gen Z was making fun of. Like, it was a joke. They would show like a calendar, and they're like, "See, this calendar is evidence of Hamas headquarters."
Yeah.
The point I'm making is there was no evidence of that. And the president of the United States, you know, the person that the black church is allowed to sully their place of worship. The black church invited this person in to lie in the house of God, and he said that he saw evidence Al-Shifa was Hamas headquarters. The same person said he saw with his eyes that UNRWA was engaged on October 7th, even though multiple investigations proved not to be false.
Right.
This lying president was allowed into the house of God. Anyway, I'm sorry. You guys see, I'm still pissed about that. That's from yesterday's stream.
I mean, that UNRWA point is very important because go back to the present day. Like, I was talking with someone I know in northern Gaza, and he was like, for almost 70 days, we haven't had, because the Israelis have cut off the supply of anything to northern Gaza. So we haven't had food, we haven't fruit, vegetables, clean water. We haven't had anything delivered there. So this is an ongoing famine on top of the genocide, which is being broadcast 24/7, all of which could end like that if these Western institutions meant anything, including the UN, including all these NGOs. And I'm sorry, UNRWA. I remember months ago, I wrote an article for RT talking about when Israel accused UNRWA of having members that participated in October 7th. I think they said 12 or 13 of, was it 20,000 or 30,000 UNRWA members, employees from Gaza, something like that. Again, sorry if the number's not correct, but something like that, like a drop of water in a huge number of employees that they claimed had participated in October 7th. Of course, they didn't provide any evidence. I don't know if they ever did, but at the time they wrote my article, they didn't. And that was enough to get Western nations to stop funding UNRWA. And then I remember it was in December or something, I think it was the Times of Israel had written an article saying Israel already intended to have UNRWA deplatformed, defunded. Israel didn't want UNRWA there. Now, UNRWA, I don't, I can't really speak that much on UNRWA. It is a UN body, so I wouldn't, believe any claims that it has anything to do with Palestinian resistance, because the UN, is the UN. But this ludicrous claim set the stage for a stoppage of funding to UNRWA. Plus, I think we already mentioned Egypt prevents all these. If we didn't, there's hundreds or thousands of aid trucks on the Egyptian side of Rafah in the south of Gaza that are not being allowed entry into Gaza for the most part. Maybe a trickle now and then get in. This famine, various representatives of NGOs, I'm trying to remember the one, there was a very strong spoken woman. It's been a few months since I thought of her name. But anyway, she said this could be ended tomorrow. Just let the aid trucks in. So you have all this premeditated, it's on a larger scale of the premeditated slow genocide that Israel was conducting, a decade and a half prior to October 2023. Israel in 2008 or 2010, maybe 2010, it was discovered that Israel had calculated, based on the population of Gaza and the number of calories they needed, how much aid to allow into Gaza. And this isn't benevolent aid from benevolent Israel. This is aid from aid agencies, and then cut that amount of aid trucks by roughly one half, meaning that there was one Zionist, disgusting, whatever his position was, basically said, put the Palestinians on a starvation diet. It's just like, all this is out in the open. There are good Israeli NGOs, Bet Salem, and good journalists like Amira Haas, who was writing for Haaretz for a long time, who would write the reality. In fact, she's the one that wrote about this Red Lines document, a starvation of Palestinians in Gaza, back 2008 or 10. I'm sorry, I don't remember which year. But this has been, and my work in Gaza, so aside from covering two Israeli wars, 2009, 2012, on which I wasn't in a hotel, I was on the ground. In 2009, I was with Palestinian medics in their ambulances in northern Gaza in very hard circumstances. In one time, our ambulance came under Israeli sniper fire, and one of the medics was shot in the leg during ceasefire hours. In any case, aside from documenting what was then horrific atrocities, including the use of white phosphorus and dart bombs by the Israeli army against Palestinian medics and civilians, what I was doing there was accompanying farmers and fishers for the first period, and the farmers throughout. And so actually, I was just reading before you and I started talking, and you made reference to Israeli soldiers shooting out of boredom. And so I was reading one of these, I think it was Press TV's report on it, and it was citing Israelis talking to, I think, 972 magazine, Israeli soldiers admitting, yeah, we have free reign to fire on Palestinians, and, I just shoot when I'm bored. But this is nothing new. In 2009, I know many cases, people I whose testimonies I took, during and after that war who had no reason to be fired upon, including an infant that was in his mother's arms, and he was killed by an Israeli sniper, or people fleeing after Israeli forces attacked their house with white phosphorus, and when they waved a white piece of cloth or whatever, and they wanted to evacuate, they wanted to bring the dead with them to give them burial. And they came under fire by Israeli snipers, killing more of this family that had already been either burned alive or burned badly by white phosphorus. Many, many, many stories that I and others documented, and that's 2009. So I just want to highlight this whole, I was bored and wanted to fire, and nobody, had free reign to do that. This isn't new. It's Israeli policy.
Yeah, as always, your experience is very educating because you've seen these things firsthand. The barbarism of Zionism, it never ceased to amaze me every time I hear these stories, and you see IDF people shooting at children and people defending it. It is wild. And this is why it was one of the things, the Israel issue is the thing that completely exposes the red-blue game. It was the thing that made me all right, there's no way I will ever vote for a Zionist. I voted Joe Stein in 2016. The last time I voted for Let's Do Evil was 2012, when I had no idea what this issue was about. As soon as I got educated about Gaza, I think it was the 2014 slaughter that Israel engaged in was that opened my eyes. And when you look at what Biden did, especially when we go back to UNRWA, you had, I believe it was John Kirby, who he said that there are people in Gaza that are on the brink of starvation. I think the number he said, John Kirby said there's around 1 million Palestinians that's on the brink of starvation. So Israel need to do a better job of getting aid out. When he said that, my jaw dropped to the floor. You admit that? And then the media's printed it uncritically. 1 million Palestinians at risk of starvation, said John Kirby. That is admittance of a massive crime, because the United States has been complicit in helping Israel block this aid. You had IDF helping militant Israeli settlers block aid coming in. And then after you say that 1 million people on the brink of starvation, after you say that, you then cut aid to the largest aid organization after you acknowledge that there's a famine. That's crimes on the highest level. Meanwhile, as the Biden administration is doing historically evil shit, you got liberals trying to fearmonger over Project 2025. They want us to fear over. There's nothing that Trump or these Republicans have done that is anywhere near as evil as that. And now there's one more quick story I want to present, because I do want to get to North Korea before we wrap up. But I saw this, I tweeted about this today, and the tweet is already doing numbers. I don't know where it's at now.
Oh, interesting.
I was doing you guys know, I'll read about maybe 5 to 7 stories a day. I was preparing for my hotspot. As I always do, I do a ton of reading. I've come across this story. And this story isn't new to me. This kind of story isn't new. I just wanted to highlight to people to realize how absurd Zionism and the settler colonial project known as Israel actually is. So I shared this story this morning on Twitter, and people are freaking out what? Yeah, this stuff happens all the time. So as Zionists, they get upset whenever you mention that Israel is not real. It's a settler colonial project from white people who are living in delusion that they are from the indigenous land of Palestine. So let's take a look at this white boy here. There's this white boy. This white boy from New York. Does this look like someone who is indigenous to the Middle East, my friends? Zionists would look at you.
I mean, yes. I met illegal Jewish colonists with I don't know if it was which part of the UK accents, but very distinct British accents when I was there in the West Bank in 2007, and they were at a place in this Susia place I mentioned earlier, where a plot of land was being stolen before our eyes by these illegal colonists, and they were like, yeah. Nobody's on the land. Why was nobody on the land? Because they'd beaten the crap out of them so many times. The elderly farmers, which had the deeds to the land, were afraid to go there. And so then people like this were coming and harassing these elderly Palestinian farmers with their British accents. So this guy's what? You said New York?
Yeah. He's from New York. I'm gonna get to the story here soon. I just wanted to take this time to, and I'm sorry I had to cover this today. I had to get to cover this. Feel free to interrupt me anytime. But this story I thought today is just too good. It's too good. And feel free to interrupt with your thoughts anytime here. But you said earlier that when you first got into it, you was apolitical. My story is the same. When I first discovered Israel Palestine, let's say around 2012, the last time I ever felt for less too evil, when I was a young, teenage, dumb liberal, didn't know anything about the world. When I thought about the Israel-Palestine conflict, I was like, oh man, this is another example of religion ruining the world. You guys, I told you guys, I was like that edgy atheist guy. I was like, my first interpretation of this conflict was, oh man, it's just another example of religion causing people to fight. Another example of religion. No, this had nothing to do with religion. This is an issue of settler colonialism. This is an issue whether you support colonialism or you do not. There's a reason why these white people who support colonialism, who their family benefited from colonialism, they are the same people who support the settler colonial project of Israel. When they see young college students stand up for Palestinians, they're in horror because they know their family benefited from a form of colonialism. At the end of this day, you support Israel if you support colonialism. You support Palestine if you do not, which is why the majority of the world population has been supportive of Palestine, and the United States has been behind. When you actually understand this, it's actually a very easy issue to understand, actually. You have a bunch of Europeans and some people from South America, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe a lot of South Americans as well, but mostly European people decided that they wanted to live in the Middle East, in this place that their book calls the Holy Land. But it's very inconvenient that there was already people who lived there.
The bride is already married.
Sorry, what was that?
There's an expression in Arabic, the bride is beautiful, or maybe it was never in Arabic, but they said the bride is beautiful, but she's already married. The land is beautiful, but it's already inhabited. That's
perfect. And not only will Zionists look at you with a straight face and tell you that the white boy that from New York is from Israel is even more ridiculous. Zionists will look at you with a straight face and tell you this motherfucker is indigenous to Israel. Like, this is my banger tweet. This tweet was such a banger that I had this motherfucker even had to respond because this motherfucker literally think that Israel is his land. And I know I'm putting a lot of emphasis on this, but I really have to highlight the pathology of Zionism.
Yeah,
like it's truly a mental illness. Let's see if I can find my other one. Because there's
and while you look for that, I think I mentioned it when you and I last spoke, but I've encountered Palestinians, including in Gaza, who spoke of their Jewish neighbors and Jewish friends. So they weren't being, even after Israel was created, they were still being like good people and saying, yeah, we had Jewish neighbors and we got along. They weren't being this hate-filled, like, this is my land, although it is their land.
Exactly.
Ideology. And
that's I'm thankful that you made that point, because that's not what the Palestinian movement is not about competing for the land.
Yeah.
We don't want to make this a land only for Palestine. No, they want this to be the way the land been treated historically for decades and centuries, where Christians, Jews, and Arabs and Muslims live in harmony. Like the history of the Middle East. What these Europeans, like this person, another person who has a pathology, who believe that she's indigenous.
Who is that?
That's Amy Schumer.
Oh, okay. I'm really bad with pop culture.
Yeah, it's not that important that you actually know who these people are. It's not that important that you actually know who these people are. I'm just giving you guys some examples, some famous people who we are supposed to accept as Middle Eastern. This is Benjamin Malofsky.
Yeah.
I think people call him Netanyahu because it's inconvenient if people actually know his real name. This is the reality of the mental illness known as Zionism that we are dealing with. So these people, they come and they believe they can treat these Palestinians any way they want to, because they are the occupiers, they are the invaders. That's what they would have us believe. But anyway, let's get back to the story, because that's just a side point. Because there's this white boy, one of the many people who believe that he's indigenous to Palestine, even though he literally lived in New York, which I find interesting for this pathology, because I explained that he he lives in Queens, New York. So very interesting that you have this holy land that you don't even want to live in.
And then on the flip side, you have, I'm sure you've met them in the States, and I've met them in Lebanon, in Syria, elsewhere, Palestinians who are actually indigenous to Palestine, who have never seen their homeland, who know what their village or town is like because it's been passed down from their grandparents and their parents. They can describe the area where they're from, but they've never been there because they're not allowed to go there. And yet these yahoos from around the world can just go to Israel and say, this is my land. It's, you know, it's another example of something that would be entirely unacceptable were it not, like you say, this settler colonial project, you know, set up by the West and backed by the West. It's ridiculous. I can't think of anywhere else where this would be acceptable, where you can't go to your homeland that you've been expelled from.
It's literally infuriating thing about. But let me quickly get through this because we got one more quick topic we can cover. North Korea. We be quick on that one.
Sure.
Here's the title: American IDF soldier fought in Gaza, now fights for truth on college campuses. Sam Freed, a former soldier in the IDF paratrooper brigade, spoke to the Post about returning to America after dropping everything to help Israel commit a genocide after October 7th. Sorry, I just had to fix the last part.
Yeah.
This story is, I see you gasping because that's my reaction. And I posted this morning. I don't know what the tweet is, but everyone's reaction is hilarious because people are now realizing this is actually very normal. So as Zionists are denying the leftist claim that Israel is a settler colonial project, they will get upset at you for saying that. They say you're anti-Semitic. As they say you're anti-Semitic for saying it's colonialism, we have someone from fucking New York crossing in a whole ass ocean in order to commit a genocide of the indigenous people of the population so Europeans can live in Palestine. Let me continue. I'm going to read a little bit of it for sake of time, and I'll get your thoughts of it because the story is so absurd. When Sam Fried, because it also showed about the censorship, because this guy went to Gaza and committed a genocide, and now he went back to America, and he's part of this psyop where they want to censor Americans for exposing the crimes that he committed. You know how crazy? That's so insane. But let's read the first two paragraphs I get you in here. When Sam Fried returned to America after serving in the IDF, the IOF, he faced a new battle defending Israel and his people against misinformation and hostility with truth and dialogue. So let me translate this paragraph. This motherfucker went to Gaza, a New Yorker went to Gaza to kill Palestinians, to commit a genocide. Now he came back home and he wants to censor you. He wants to rob you of your First Amendment rights so you don't expose his crimes. Now let me read the next paragraph and I'll translate it and I'll pass it to you after this because the first two paragraphs alone is enough to capture how absurd this story is. Mm-hmm. Fried, originally from Queens, New York. Let me repeat. For all the people who do not understand what we are dealing with here, this is not a religious issue. This is not a Muslim versus Jew issue.
No.
This is not about Arab versus the whites. This is about colonialism. Do you support colonialism or do you not? The countries who support colonialism are the harshest defenders of Israel. So let me read this last paragraph. I know you're trying to get in here. Fried, originally from Queens, joined the army in 2020. So he's an American who is serving another army.
Yeah.
He's serving the IDF. So right-wingers, how is that alone not enough to fuck you up? That you have Americans who not serving your army, they're not dying for your oil campaigns. He's dying for the conquest of another army. How is that not traitors at face value? So he served in another army in a treasonous way. And then after his service, he left in 2022 to come back in America to make money. I'm going to go to America and make some money. So then he retired from the IDF, went to America. Then October 7th happened. I'll sum in the paragraph up here. And after the atrocities of October 7th, Fry said, I felt it was my obligation to be one of the fighting Jews in history. This is the craziness that has been normalized, where you can have traitor swine like this person join another military to commit a genocide, and it's 100% normalized. And how many times have you guys seen me use the word treason? And treason, it's usually not a word that's often in my vocabulary. But if I was to sum anything up as treasonous, it will be this guy's actions. But so, Eva, before we get to North Korea, I want to pass it to you. Any reactions to this? I think this story is glorious because it exposes how the delusion that these Zionists are indigenous to Israel, right, anything other than just pure colonialism masked behind religious struggle. But Eva, any thoughts on this story?
It's just, we've seen so much hypocrisy and upside down reporting, quote unquote, reporting on Palestine, on Syria, on Ukraine, on Donbass, on anything to do with Russia. It's not surprising. It's your standard inversion of reality, or just making shit up. But in this case, they're not making shit up because he really believes that he's doing a noble purpose, and that the paper, whatever, they're endorsing this narrative that supports this colonial project in Israel. What gives me hope is that not only Palestinian resistance, but the regional resistance is unified, and they're not taking this crap any longer. We've seen it from Ansarullah in Yemen. We've seen Hezbollah waging tactical strikes against Israeli military objects and showing their drone footage of northern occupied Palestine, of strategic points that they can target. So, we're going to see a lot more of this ridiculous propaganda. I mean, God, they inundated us for months and months and months with the Hamas rape and beheading stories, which are absolutely not based in reality and which are pure projection. And as people rightly say, confessions, of what the Israeli army actually has been doing. We're going to see more wild stories like this, desperate attempts to regain any sort of legitimacy for Israel. But I don't know, you're based in the States. You frequent Western media more than me, because I frankly can't stomach it other than when I have to research something. So maybe you can speak to me. I think you did when we spoke last. Is this working on the American public, since you're based in the US? Are these type of propaganda stories working, or are they only serving a select audience? Because I have to imagine at this point, with the world watching the genocide 9 months in, almost 10 months in, I have to imagine that a lot of people aren't buying this shit anymore. So what would you say?
We talk about this a little bit on your show because you're not in the States, but what we have seen over the last, 10 months, 9 months now, regarding public sentiment towards Israel has been truly mind-blowing. And you know this because you've been covering this longer than me, but even someone who, I covered this for 3 years, but I followed it even longer as someone who wasn't even a journalist. So I followed this story for about 10 years or so. Yeah. So as someone who's been following this story for a very long time, who always centered Israel-Palestine, it was always extremely frustrating how this wasn't on the minds of Americans. That has completely shifted. There's even narrative, and I can't even believe this, there's even narratives on the right condemning Israel. Now, to be clear, a lot of them don't do it for the same reason we do. They're not like strictly opposed to settler colonialism, but they do see the money spent by AIPAC. They see their politicians, their foreign policy decisions being influenced by Israel. And I see in a small segment of the right, the Alex Jones types, the Candace Owens types that are starting to be critical of that. And I know that those are the big names, but this is shown in the polling, where there's a poll I did a hotspot video on, where 58% of white evangelical Christians didn't support the military actions of Israel, which is a mind-blowing statistic, because white evangelicals are the most mindless supporting Zionists in the world, and even they started turning on Israel. Then you have all these campus protests. So essentially the dam broke in a way that I don't think anyone could have really predicted because of Israel genocide. And that which leads to the massive censorship. Now, I'm not even going to cover the story because we are running out of time, because I have a hotspot video coming out on this, but this is very relevant. The hotspot video I recorded 5 minutes before I went live was uncovering this story, how Meta is removing posts targeting Zionists. So you're not even allowed to use the term Zionist on Meta no more. They're mass banning anyone who exposes the crime of Israel. You have the United States who passed a law making it labeling you an anti-Semite if you criticize the actions of Israel, and then they force universities to adopt said definition, and now they are pressuring them to suspend and expel students for that. Now, there's a reason why we are seeing this mass influx of Zionist authoritarianism and censorship. As much as the capitalist class and the liberal class in the West, they want to have this illusion of freedom. Like, they don't want to do this shit. They do it because they have to. Like, if you go along with the state, like if you support all their genocides, all their wars, all their class war politics, they will give you as much freedom as you want. Freedom conditions. If you support the empire, you got free speech. You can carry guns whenever you want. You don't have to worry about shit. But the second that you question the foundation of their establishment, which Zionism is, that's when you start seeing the true fascism come out of liberal. Remember, if you scratch a liberal, fascists bleed.
If I can add a caveat, I think you and I talked about this. If not, I'll just say it quickly. In October, YouTube deleted my channel, which I had for 13 or more years. It was immediately the day after I did a long thread on what was then, I believe, still Twitter, talking about my experiences with Palestinian medics and the Israeli justification for targeting medics and ambulances as being they were transporting resistance fighters, which was not the case. And so I did this long thread. The next day I wake up and my YouTube's gone, right? And then I had a very small, undeveloped YouTube that I think I opened when I was in Gaza. I put like 3 videos on it. And then for whatever reason, I didn't develop it. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll use that. And my only intention was to use it to redirect people, to upload a few videos, get at least 500 people. So I had a community section and could redirect people to Odyssey, Rumble, Telegram, etc. And that was shut down because I had a video called Ukraine as a Kill List, and I'm on it. And anyway, my point being is I completely agree that, this whole premise of free speech, blah, 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 is completely nonsense. But there are accounts out there that claim to be fighting empire, fighting Zionism, who are miraculously not censored and allowed to be platformed on X, millions of followers and so on. I'm not going to get into it, but I think it's very interesting. I guess I would just say to your followers,
Fiorella Isabel, sorry to interrupt, but Fiorella Isabel was another one who was just banned on YouTube.
Yeah. And
it's interesting how some people are allowed to thrive. We are shadow banned. Like we literally had someone confirmed it. We are shadow banned on YouTube.
Oh, me too. On X, I'm totally shadow banned. Like I have people.
And I'll pass right to you. But your point you're making, isn't it interesting how some people are allowed to thrive and some people are shut down immediately?
Well, and I'm just making that point to ask people to exercise some critical thinking. Just because you see someone saying a flashy talking point, or posting an image, a photoshopped image of themselves looking cool, and like if you support Hamas or stuff like that, please start to exercise some critical thinking. It's great to hear these talking points, but is this person legitimate? Especially if they're able, not one person, but many people like this. Are they legitimate if they're able to flourish on these platforms? And frankly, as you pointed out, and that's why I reached out to you a month or whatever ago it was, when you had a fantastic articulate tweet saying these people are making money on the corpses of Palestinians. So some of these accounts will say they support resistance, but it's because they've copped on to the fact that if they want to be viewed as authentic, they must say stuff like this. Anyway, just critical thinking, including of what I say. That's why I always say I'm not an expert. I don't pretend to know everything. Here's my experiences. Take what you want of what I have to say. Do your own research. That's how it should be. Don't blindly follow one person, one channel, whatever it is.
Yeah. And I'm going to pivot to our last topic just for sake of time. I appreciate the time. It's always great to be in conversation with you, Eva. And one thing that I've been, because of my friend Didi, you guys see, let me put her chat that she just had up. Didi was on Twitter before, and her account was banned. That's how I know Didi. She's a good friend of mine. Her account was banned because she spent a lot of her time debunking empire lies about North Korea. So you guys know we just talked about we have accounts that are allowed to thrive.
Yeah.
Didi was banned. She had an account that got 30,000 followers, and about 70%, maybe I'm overestimating, 50-70% of her posts was spending time debunking talking points against North Korea, and they got rid of her on some bullshit. They said they banned her for ban evasion. Shit, say what? This is my only account. They banned her for ban evasion, so she didn't come back. She never came back on Twitter because she like.
Well, I mean, where else is she? I'd love to read what she's writing. Is she on some other platform?
I talked to you. I'll talk to you later because I know she.
Yeah.
Private. I talked to you later. But
she
had these. Her old account was forgiven. I know a lot of you guys may remember, but she had these amazing tweets exposing North Korea talking points, and there were so many of these progressive Bernie style people who couldn't stand her, hated her guts. How dare you defend North Korea? Here she is. Ban evasion. I had the account since 2011. Yeah, I'm glad that a lot of people in our community at least remember her original account, which was a banger, because she taught me about North Korea. Because I didn't know that much about it. I became friends with Didi, learn more about her account. Glad to see that she's in the chat. I knew I would lure you in with a North Korea title. I just knew it. Because she was kind of obsessive, but you need people like that. You need people who are obsessed with exposing this propaganda. And the reason why it's important to have people like Didi out there and yourself who's willing to tell the truth about North Korea is because American propaganda has an effect. Like, they're not doing this shit for shits and giggles.
Yeah.
You have half of Americans who view China as their enemy. So I do the propaganda segments where we in the chat, like it'd be so absurd. You know what I mean? We'd be watching segments, we'd be like, how can anyone fall for it? Nick, are you sure this is even worth their time covering it? And I'm like, guys, I know it's goofy, but it 100% is. As goofy as this anti-China shit sounds, it's working on 50% of Americans, according to polls. And then there's this, and I'll pass it to you on this thought very broadly. This is why I became also obsessed with defending North Korea, because I learned that everything I was told about North Korea was a fucking lie. And I was never an imperialist, guys. Never. I was never one of those people like these motherfuckers in this poll I'm about to show you. I was just one of those liberal-minded people that, like, I would say stuff like this. I would say, oh, man, we can have Mitt Romney win because Mitt Romney would turn us to North Korea.
Yeah.
not like aggressively mean shit, but I would say like passively fucked up shit about North Korea. And if you asked me at the time, I would be like, well, they like, Nick, why you hate North Korea? Oh, I don't know. Because I thought CNN, I thought they said that. I don't know. And I asked myself that question one day, like, Nick, why do you even believe this shit? And then that's why I started decolonizing my mind. Now,
if I could just tell you a little anecdote. So, not at all related to North Korea, but related to the kind of comments you were making. So I was back in Canada after 4 years of not being in Canada. I went back to see my mom and my brothers. I hadn't gone back because of the stupid COVID restrictions, and then because, well, I didn't feel safe going back, but eventually I decided to risk it because I wanted to see my mom. So I decided basically I will risk going back, and if they throw me in prison like an Israeli would Palestinian under administrative detention, like accusing me of war crimes apology or whatever because I've reported under Ukraine's bombs from Donbass. If they do that, okay, I'm going to risk it because I want to see my mom. She's elderly, and I'm going to take that risk anyway. So she's in a long-term care facility. She has dementia. And I was there one day and I heard some young guy in the cafeteria saying something like, I can't remember, he made some stupid remark about Russia. And he's like, I don't know. It's like, oh, Russians are so ugly. Like you go to Russia, they get a facelift and they're ugly, or something stupid like that. And I'm like,
that's opposite of the truth, by the way. Russians are extremely hot, but go ahead.
Oh, they are gorgeous people. Yeah. But whatever, he said something like that. And I said, like, and how do you know this? And he's like, oh, it was just a remark, she clearly like heard some talking point, whatever it was. And the next day or a couple of days later, he actually came up to me and said, I'm really sorry. Like, it was a stupid remark. I wasn't even thinking. I was like, oh, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, good for them. Good for them. And
so the point is, say, like, I think we all have a degree. Even myself, I'm sure I've said stupid things and been like, where did I get that from? Like, I think we're all susceptible to it.
Yeah, and there's these right wingers who I find hilarious. These are the people that say, I would never trust CNN. I don't trust the CIA because apparently the right wing, they don't trust the intelligence agencies no more because of Trump. They're like extremely skeptical of the CIA and FBI now, which has been a very interesting development in the States over the last few years. But they'll say, I don't trust the establishment. I don't trust the deep state. I don't trust CNN, New York Times. That's the liberal media. But then they will believe everything the liberal media says about China, about North Korea, about socialism. And that's like as soon as I saw like the liberals lying about socialism, lying about Russia, China, all these countries, then I asked myself the simple question is, if they're lying about everything we were told, they have to be lying about North Korea. Why would that be the one thing they tell the truth about? Now, let me read this headline. I've been teasing it for a while for people just listening. Here's the poll. This is the headline, and the reason why I decided to take this issue so seriously. Americans are terrifyingly supportive of nuking civilians in North Korea. A new survey finds that a third of Americans embrace a nuclear strike that will kill 1 million people. A third, 1 out of 3, 1, 2, crazy, 1, 2, crazy. That's how it looks like when you line up with people. 1 out of 3, and I know 1 out of 3 Americans are crazy, but let's look at even the smaller number, where you have around 70+% of Americans who support sanctions on North Korea.
Yeah.
So let's think about it, Eva, and I'll pass to you for your thoughts. Let's think about the pathology of Americans and how they've been brainwashed. They claim, well, they would say they would claim they hate North Koreans based on how they hate North Korea based on how they treat their people. I hate the North Korean government because the way they treat their people. So my response is that we should nuke their people.
Yeah.
My criticism of North Korea is that they have a hard time feeding their people. So in response, we should sanction the people and make it harder for them to feed themselves. You guys see how that doesn't even make sense? So I know we're low on time here, so Eva, I'll pass it to you for your experiences with North Korea, the misconceptions many people have, very broadly, but you guys see the problem, reason why I take this issue on, because Americans who think they're anti-establishment have been brainwashed to hate people. They can't even explain why. Go ahead, Eva. I would love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, it's the same with Venezuela and Syria and Iran and Russia, like all these countries that are sanctioned by the West. People have just absorbed these talking points, and they don't really understand why they hate Bashar al-Assad. Or if they do, they've been programmed wrong, frankly, because if you spend 5 minutes in Syria, you see, yeah, they have complaints about the government. They want certain changes, but Bashar al-Assad isn't their problem. Yeah. And I've spent considerable time. I'm not saying that because it's been told to me by the Syrian government. I've spent considerable time since 2014 in Syria. I speak Arabic. I engage with people. I travel. I walk on the streets. I talk with people. So it's not like I'm hearing it from elites. Now, I will say about my trip to North Korea, it was only 1 week. I don't speak Korean, in spite of the fact that I did live 2 years in South Korea. I mean, I know some words, but I'm not conversational by any means. I was reliant on a translator, and I didn't travel freely. I will say all that up front. And being there in 1 week, I was in Pyongyang, I was at the DMZ, and in a cooperative farm outside of Pyongyang. So my point being, I don't claim to have seen everything. I don't know everything. But what I did see, now I will preface it before I say what I did see. Now, I know many of your listeners will already know this, so I apologize for repeating information that you probably already know very well, especially your North Korea specialists. But now, this is from an article I wrote after my visit in 2017. At that time, and you can correct me if there's an update, but at that time, I was citing what is it? IAC Action Center, New York-based. I'm forgetting their name, but I was citing an article from a group I trust in the West. But then also, I would obviously corroborated elsewhere. But in that time, in 2017. There were nearly 30,000 U.S. troops in South Korea, right? And every year they wage what they call war games, which in reality is a simulation of the destruction of North Korea. So you have that on the one hand. You have, and what you're saying about liberal and conservative. I mean, back in 2017, Trump was vowing to, in the United Nations, to destroy North Korea. Colin Powell in 95 threatened to turn North Korea into a charcoal briquette, which the U.S. already did, and reiterated that in 2013. And then I was just citing some research I did for my article that America did already turn North Korea into a charcoal briquette, dropping over 600,000 tons of bombs, including over 30,000 tons of napalm on North Korea. And in Pyongyang itself, which at the time had 400,000 people, they dropped over that amount of bombs. And as I recall, every building that was above 2 or 3 stories was flattened, something like that, something very dramatic. Yeah, on top of which you have the North being sanctioned by the West since that point. So they bombed the hell out of the North, and then they sanctioned them, making it almost impossible for them to rebuild. But what I want to say is, in that week I spent there, And no, I didn't see everything. And no, I can't speak to the whole country. What I saw was very impressive. The rebuilding they've done in terms of residential, in terms of centers for the public, the children's palace that serves 5,000 children every day for free, teaching them all sorts of extracurricular, cultural, scientific, sport activities. And I'm just going to have to go back to my article because it's been 2017. It's been a while since I've thought about that in detail. But, you know, I did have the chance to go to different schools. And by the way, this is something I saw in the Donbass as well. So in a middle school, I remember seeing posters of warning children not to touch unexploded ordnances because there's such a vast amount of unexploded ordnances still in the north. And so they have to be taught, you know, like, don't approach these things because it happens, or farmers will plow fields or whatever and come across them. And in the Donbass and Donetsk, I remember being in a phone company place, getting a SIM card and seeing in the wall, like similar kind of warnings, like, be careful, look for this mine, look for these explosions. If this happens, go to the basement. I mean, they don't need instructions since Ukraine has been warring on them since 2014. But nonetheless, it's a similar reality that people who hate these areas without understanding, you know, what they're actually hating, they don't know these nuances of the terror these populations have endured in the case of North Korea for decades and decades. Yeah, I mean, I also went to a pretty impressive children's hospital, a 300-bed facility that they had in that hospital. They had distance, what's it called, consultation. So specialists in the hospital could consult with people in rural communities to give them, and if they needed to come into the city, obviously they would. But I mean, they're doing a lot of things from that brief time that I was there. And I'm sure some of your friends that are listening now and otherwise can probably fill me in a great deal more. But the point being, this whole concept of we hate North Korea because they oppress their people is bullshit. It is we that have oppressed the North, and they have a different political system. And frankly, probably a better one. It doesn't have, like you were talking about freedom. We were talking about freedoms of expression and not in the huge degree of censorship. And yet we have the audacity to point fingers at countries like North Korea and say, well, they don't have freedom of expression. Well, yeah, there are certain media restrictions. Maybe they don't have access to the idiotic internet sites that everybody can access in the West and be indoctrinated. But I'm not actually opposed to that. If it means they're fighting for their survival, then you know, it's whatever. And this whole sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? Characterization of their leader as crazy, or, you know, whatever. Okay, unpredictable might be an apt term, but that's a self-defense mechanism, right? As is having a nuclear deterrent, as is routinely testing weapons.
You might want to chime in real quick, because on that thought, like, because what happened to Korea is crazy, my friends. We killed 2 million North Koreans. So think about this, and I'll pass right to you on your point. We killed 1 million of their people in a gross violation of their sovereignty. And then in response, after losing the war, we then put economic sanctions, and then we isolated them for the world because they had the audacity of winning a war. So what do you guys think will happen to a populace if you are under siege by the entirety of Western society after losing 2 million of your people just a generation ago? Like, what, the Korean War was that, the 50s? That's not a long time ago. My dad was born in the late 50s. Well, sorry, early 60s. It's not that fucking long ago, guys. The 50s is now, so that happened less than 100 years ago. They were massively wiped out. What the fuck do you think their society is going to look like? Of course they're going to be militaristic. I would too. And honestly, them getting a nuke was the best decision a world leader made in the modern times. Because if they didn't get a nuke, they would have been already wiped off the map. Gaddafi gave up his nukes. What happened to him? Go ahead, Eva.
Yeah, well, I guess we can make it maybe broader. Like, I mean, I guess in terms of what I saw, obviously, I would love to go back and see more. I'd like to see more of the countryside. I'd like to be better equipped to say, like, yeah, you know, I saw in these villages also they're not starving. But at present, I can't say that I've seen that. I've seen what I saw from the vehicle driving to the south, to the DMZ, and the villages look like, frankly, like villages I saw in South Korea, because I did travel a lot in South Korea when I lived there. But, you know, a week there isn't enough time to be definitive in knowledge about how life is there. But We've already established that basically the West will lie about any country or any body or entity or resistance or whatever that doesn't align with their bow and obey to our commands kind of dictates and etc. So I think the better premise is to not assume everything you're hearing in the media and from all these late night talk shows, etc. Every man in North Korea has to have the same haircut, for example, was one of them. Ridiculous. Or like the stories about Kim Jong-un releasing a pack of wild dogs on one of his, I don't know, aunt or niece or family member or whatever. Like, they're just batshit crazy stories emanating from Washington. Better to just say, I don't know, rather than to believe these things. And if you have the chance to go, then even better. But I wanted to
go, sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I can make a small delegation happen, then you are most welcome. And I do want to state, because Wikipedia and other crappy sites have said that my trip there was paid for by the North Korean government, which is absolutely false. I applied for a visa. I went with 2 other people. I paid for most of it. And one of the people I went with donated to me because I didn't have a lot of money because I poured all my money into going to Syria. So, but no funds were granted by the North Korean government.
I remember Dennis Rodman going to North Korea, famous basketball player, Dennis Rodman.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing the story as a teenager in political. I was like, man, that boy Dennis Rodman is wild, man. Now, I didn't have a negative take on it. I was just like, man, that's wild. You went to North Korea, man, that's crazy. I would 100% go because Dennis Rodman, who they smeared as crazy, went to North Korea because Kim Jong-un is a big basketball fan. He also big into weed culture. Didi wrote about this. It's very interesting as well, where you can smoke a blunt on the street in North Korea. I can see in the article, I covered this on RBN. There are a lot of things that people don't know about North Korea. They got big basketball culture. So they invited Dennis Rodman to come on. And Dennis Rodman came back to the United States, was like, bro, that place was beautiful. What the fuck? This place was perfect. And then they're like, oh, Dennis Rodman is crazy. And they do this to everybody. They do that to you. They do that to anyone who goes to North Korea and say North Korea is not what the West say. And one of the reasons we know this, because North Korea and China, they also have a student exchange program. You have North Korean students that go to China. If North Korea was such a shithole, why would these students go back? They have the exchange programs all the time. And you have these journalists that go to North Korea. And I'm just sharing, and we can wrap up. So I'm sorry, we're going a little bit long. So I'm sharing how I know about North Korea, because there are people who blow the whistle all the time about Western lies. There will be North Korean exchange student that goes to China, and then they will tell stories to Chinese people, and they will share the stories. There are ways to learn the truth about this stuff. You also get news from people like Eva Bartlett, who are independent journalists. So what the West says, and this will be my absolute last point in the stream, what the West says is that you shouldn't listen to people like Eva. You shouldn't listen to Dennis Rodman, because North Korea has this very sophisticated propaganda program where they set up fake cities. So according to the West, now bear with me, guys. According to the West, every time that someone's come to North Korea, they take time to set up a fake city, a fake community, and they make it so people only see that, so you guys don't see the harsh reality of what North Korea produced. This is what people like John Bolton and them say all the time. They say you guys are falling for the fake cities. So I'm gonna ask you guys this simple question: which is more likely? Which is more likely? North Korea somehow is able to create this complicated program where they're able to create fake cities that tourists are only allowed to go through that North Koreans don't know about. Or did the United States lie to you again?
Yeah.
Which one is more likely?
You know, when I was writing the article in 2017 after my visit, I came across an essay in Forbes, of all publications. And they did have a lot of the propaganda, but they also had some truths there. So I will read from that. The author, I don't remember who it was, said Pyongyang looks much more like a normal city than 25 years ago. So I think it was he had presumably been there before. Then 25 years before, there were no private cars and few government ones. I wondered why they bothered with the traffic lights. Today there's traffic. It's not much by US or Chinese standards, but there's no longer a ghostly sense of
that's
empty
the closest they're going to come to admitting they lied to you. I'm sorry, Eva, but that's the closest they're going to come to admitting they lied to you, to say, oh, well, it's a normal city now. Anyway, go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, and the other thing I think I mentioned to you when we last spoke was that in the airport, after having left North Korea in Beijing airport, I just randomly met a man who was born in South Korea. and who, when he was a child, his family moved to, I think it was Los Angeles, but I don't remember. And he had been to North Korea many times. And he was telling me like, yeah, and now I don't remember if it was like in the past decade, but anyway, it was in a period of time that he had been to North Korea, and he kept going back, and he kept saying, there's positive developments. There's positive developments. And this is a man born in South Korea, grown up in the US, you know, so he should have been indoctrinated twice over. And yet he had gone to the North and had positive things to say. So it's not just like me who's on Putin and Kim Jong-un and Assad's payroll, according to Wikipedia. I'm not. It's not just that, or random people, but like there are many people. It's just it's hard to maybe come across these people who have had more time than my 1 week in the North, who have a lot of positive to say about what's happening in that country. Again, with the context of what you said and I said, of the country being nearly annihilated and then stuck under despicable sanctions since then. Oh yeah, Park.
Yeah, I had to show you. I showed this video maybe like 2-3 times on the channel. I had to show it one more time as we wrap up. Let's wrap up on something funny, because regarding the fake cities and all that stuff, you guys understand what they accuse North Korea of doing is very normal. It's called tourism. So when someone visits the United States, do they visit Skid Row? So what they said, well, you went to the nice part of Korea. That is literally how tourism works. When people go to Mexico, they're going to the nice part of Mexico. You know how people visit all these exotic areas, they go to the nice area. That's how when people go to the United States, they go to San Francisco. They're not going to where the homeless is at. That's literally how things work in countries. But let's play this clip. Let's end on something funny. I'm sorry we went a little long, but I think it was a great conversation. Another reason why I think it's very important for us to spend a lot of time debunking this propaganda, because you have establishment frauds like Joe Rogan, who is working their best to drive those numbers of Americans who want to nuke North Korea up. So whenever you see these traders like Yeonmi Park, like the CIA pay these traders a lot of money. There are these Venezuela traders as well. These people who are against Nicolas Maduro. There are these Cuban Gusanos who are also against the quote-unquote Cuban regime. If their solution to their criticism of their quote-unquote government is sanctions, you should immediately discredit them, because you talk to people who are against Nicolas Maduro, they're like, yeah, we think the United States should sanction Venezuela to get. No one who cares about their people will be for sanctions. Yeah, no one who cares about and I'm saying it because even if she has legitimate criticism of her country, even if the Juan Guaido supporter have legitimate criticism of their government, supporting the CIA and supporting the empire in their goal to dismantle and destroy the regime should never be the answer, which is how you know these people are sellouts. So anyway, let's watch this video. I'll shut it now. Oh, let me unmute it. This video is funny. I played it like 3 times already.
But one business like once a month. And like here it would take like 1 hour to go the other place. In Norway it take a month at least to go, because there's no electricity. And sometimes people have to push the train.
They have to push the train.
Yeah. Traveling in Norway is
This is what they want to believe. It's so ridiculous. You know it's bad because they brought this person on JRE to spread our lies. It's bad when even Joe Rogan in their own audience was like, you went too far. But anyway, let's wrap up here. It's great. I know I kept you a little bit longer than planned, but it was a great conversation. Eva, any last thoughts you have? I appreciate you coming on RBN. Always great to be in conversation with you. Any last thing you want to promote as we wrap up here?
No, just you can follow me on my Telegram channel. You can follow me on X as well, but it's kind of pointless because you won't see me. So my Telegram channel is what is it? Eva, it's either Eva K or Eva Karine Bartlett, Reality Theories.
Yeah. Make sure you guys follow Eva, hit the notification.
Oh,
you guys on X and Twitter. I'll pass right back to you on X and Twitter, guys. You guys have to unapologetically stalk your favorites. I do. I got my notifications turned on. All my RBN friends. If I have accounts I will follow, you got to turn your notifications on. I know you felt like a stalker. You got to do it because they will even out. I don't look at my timeline on no more. I look, the homepage on X. No, there's no reason it's trash. I have a tab of people I follow. I got the bell on them, and that's the tab I follow. Like the homepage is horrific. So guys, I promise you, people like Eva, real journalists are shadow banned. I see their tweets. I got the notifications on. If you guys want to follow anti-establishment journalists, you guys have to do that. And then just go in the settings, turn the notifications on, then go in the settings on your phone and then stop your phone for sending you the notification. That way, you can just go on Twitter and you just pull up the tab without you being notified of everything they do. So that's just something I wanted to tell you guys you should do so you guys can see Eva's tweets. But now I'll pass it back to you.
Well, just the last, thank you. The last thing I will say is that what I have been working on is I have footage from Crimea, interviews from Crimea. I was with Fiorella. And also I was back in Mariupol. So I spent a lot of time in 2022 in the Donbass, including many visits to Mariupol. And what I'm currently working on is a video footage that I took in Mariupol on my last visit versus 2022, because I only recently came across a despicable Guardian article which claims the city was destroyed. Now, depending on what you mean by destroyed, like I could break a fingernail and say it's destroyed. There was damage. No doubt there's damage there. The fighting was against the Ukrainian army and the Nazis embedded with them, who occupied residential buildings and fired from those buildings, including firing onto the buildings as well from other positions onto civilians in the building and holding the civilians hostage in a kind of sandwich manner where the Ukrainian forces were on top and they kept the civilians on the bottom. So there was damage, but to say the city was destroyed is ridiculous, because destroyed is Gaza. Destroyed is Raqqa, destroyed is what the US and its allies do. There was considerable damage there, but the Guardian basically took a satellite image of Mariupol, and they focused, for example, on the center of the city where there's the drama theater, where there was an event that was actually done by the Ukrainian forces to incriminate the Russians. And they basically said the entirety of the center of the city was destroyed and leveled. What they did was they took this satellite image, took it from color to black and white, and then made it fuzzy. So to the average person who doesn't know the city and hasn't been there and can't see it, it looks like, oh, it's all just fuzzy mass of nothingness. But you can take a Yandex map, for example, and do the same thing. And it will look, if you blur it, it will look similar to the Guardian. The point being, in 2022, I was in Mariupol in the places the Guardian said was destroyed, and it wasn't. There was damage. And what I'm working on is showing what I filmed in 2022. You'll see an apartment block with upper buildings, upper levels blackened out from the fighting. And you'll see a building next door and it's fine. So why is it that a building next door would be fine if Russia is just wantonly destroying the entire city? Well, it's because that wasn't the case. So that's what I'm working on. It's taking time because I do everything myself. I'm not a professional editor, but I'm doing my utmost to find the exact same buildings and same streets and then show then, now. So that's what I'm working on. And also interviews from Crimea, because the other trope that the West puts out is that it's occupied, that life is just horrible under occupation. And people I've met in 2019 when I went, and this last trip, they're like, no, life is so much better now. There's actually development. There's new roads.
I definitely want to talk to you about that one. Whenever you finish that, hit me up. We got to help promote that. I got to help promote all this stuff, because here's her Twitter. Make sure you guys follow all this stuff, but go ahead and continue.
Thank you.
This is very important work.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. Thank you for your time and for your own very informed contribution. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely gotta have you back on again soon. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Hope you guys enjoyed this. I know there's a different time now. I usually went live, but Nick at noon, Nick in the morning, Nick at night, doesn't matter. Nick at any time. Let's go. We had another bang. We had Alon Maserati on yesterday.
Oh wow.
Wyatt Reed who coming on Saturday. So I told you, this new era is banger after banger. We got the JB show, Saturday show tomorrow. You have Rome who interviews Slank. We got all these great things that are going on RBN with all these amazing guests. And we are building this new community. I told you, a new era. We want to focus on hard-hitting anti-imperialist work, and we want to completely destroy the anti-intellectualism that we've seen on the left. That's my goal, at least. So thank you for Eva for coming on. Thank you guys for watching. JB and Savvy show tomorrow. Make sure you guys check out the stream I did yesterday with Alon Maserati if you didn't get a chance to check it out. Thank you guys. Take care.
Okay. Bye.